This is the Everyday AI Show, the everyday podcast where we simplify AI and bring its power to your fingertips. Listen daily for practical advice to boost your career, business, and everyday life.
Any hour or day or week now, we'll get an official announcement from OpenAI that signals the biggest AI pivot we've seen since ChatGPT, and that's the official rollout of their AI Superapp. So the ChatGPT parent company, now with 1 billion weekly active users, made headlines recently when a senior executive off the record at least said 3 words to a reporter that will probably echo for months. Chat is dead. So any day we'll get the official announcement of OpenAI's new super app, their push to bring an autonomous coworker to millions of companies. But it's not just OpenAI making this push. Actually, Anthropic started the wave many months ago with their rollout of Claude Code and Claude Cowork, and every other big tech challenger is racing to get their version of an AI super app some momentum. Google released theirs in Anti-Gravity 2.0. Cursor has quietly become a serious contender in the space, and Microsoft also announced their upcoming super app as well. But that begs the obvious question: what the heck is a super app? And why should my company take note? Well, we're going to tackle the latest work layer shift on today's show. So welcome to Everyday AI and our Start Here series. But let's go over the big picture of what's happening now. So Anthropic started this desktop agentic era with Claude Code and Claude Cowork in late 2025 and early 2026. But Anthropic hasn't really been able to build off of that momentum, at least when it comes to being the big name in the room when it comes to an AI super app. And I think OpenAI's super app, which is essentially Codex, right? And it will be a little more tightly integrated into ChatGPT, will be coming any day. And I think that's really going to set the tone for this big pivot to the super app era, right? And Microsoft, I think, especially when you have OpenAI and Microsoft in the coming weeks or months, shifting most of their agentic focus to a super app, I think the rest of the enterprise really needs to pay attention. So on today's show, we're going to be diving into, and stick with me for the next 25 minutes, and here's what you're going to learn: why Anthropic started the super app race, but they have kind of fallen out of immediate contention. You're going to know why the models are no longer the moat and the super app harness matters more than ever. And you're going to kind of know the state of the super app race, at least as it stands right now, right before we officially get it all kicked off. All right, let's get into it. Welcome to the Start Here series. This is Everyday AI's essential podcast series to both learn the AI basics and to double down on your knowledge. So if that's what you're trying to do, we're at the tail end of the Start Here series. Right now we're in episode, what are we on now? We're on volume 28 of this. So we'll probably do 2 more and wrap it at 30. But if you don't know the Start Here series, it's great. I would say start at volume 1 if you can. And work your way up to where we are now. They're usually quicker episodes, about 30 minutes, give or take. But make sure you go to starthereseries.com. There, we put together a playlist where you can listen to every single episode of the Start Here series, so you don't have to go fishing around our website or anything like that. And that's also going to give you exclusive access to our Inner Circle community. Yeah, right now, that's the only way to get open access to it. So you can not only sign up for our free Inner Circle community, which gives you access as well to our Prime Prompt Polish version 3 course to learn context engineering 101 at your own pace, but also all of the Start Here series info. All right, and make sure if you didn't listen to our last episode, I think it's an important one in the Start Here series, which was volume 27. We went over the token maxing era and how it's over, and talking about the new era of token efficiency and how your company should adapt. So make sure you go check that out. That's volume 27 or episode 789. But let's get into today's topic, which is the AI super app. So what the heck is an AI super app, and why does it matter? Well, I'll say this. Even though I don't think we've quote unquote arrived in the super app era per se, I will say it's safe to assume This is the next version. All right. And it is funny because we started this Start Here series in January, and we've actually seen kind of two shifts. So I think the first shift we saw in January was models becoming more and more agentic by default and saying, hey, how the future of work is not reactively talking to AI chatbots. It's knowing how these models work, scheduling things out, right? And then we also had another episode talking about something I called agentic context carry, right? And that is the crucial role that not just models, but the harness that control the models play in taking context from your certain apps, right? So to boil this down to the basics here, right? One of the biggest advantages of not just the upcoming super app era, but where we're at now, right? Before Microsoft and OpenAI start really highlighting and promoting their super apps, right? Where we're at now is we do have these systems that can carry our context autonomously, right? So a lot of what the human duct tape work has been over the last 2 years is us humans who do use large language models is giving a chat our context, right? Connecting, whether it was static files, dynamically shifting things, but then it's a lot of copying and pasting from different AI systems. But now, as these systems are living on our desktop and becoming more autonomous, that does lead into the next wave, going beyond this agentic context carry. And that's where the agents ultimately live, which is the desktop OS, right? That is where I think these super apps are going to play. And I don't know if this is going to be the quote unquote final frontier of the agentic era as we have officially entered into it. It may look a little bit different, but I do think at least the companies that are going to be most successful in late 2026 and early 2027 are those that are going to be investing in their companies using these super app systems on the desktop. So the core idea of this is simple, right? A super app is bringing all of your different work surfaces together under one agentic roof. So the big AI tech companies are all building their own super apps. They know the same truth. An AI chatbot is not a moat, right? ChatGPT.com is not a moat. The model is not the moat. They all want to own the execution layer, right? And that is why every single big AI tech company is trying to build an AI super app. You could call it the harness, right? Kind of the place where all of the tools come together, but it is much more than that. And I think we'll see as we really roll out and dig into what a super app actually is. But at its basis, I think it combines a couple of different things. It combines your company's context, your files, browser access, a file viewer, automations, unified memory, and approvals and automations all in one unified platform. And, we're going to get into some of the nuances and the pros and the cons and all of those things. But the way I like to look at it now, and this is after I've been using especially Codex heavily, right? I also use the Claude desktop programs heavily, but I do think Codex is in the lead in the super app, right? And OpenAI has essentially said, FYI, they're saying, yes, Codex is the early version of the super app, which is why I've been encouraging people to use it so far, because I do think Codex is very ahead of all of the other quote unquote super apps. We've seen that by how all the other big tech companies are kind of just copying and pasting exactly what OpenAI has done with Codex, because it is that good and it is that far ahead. But this is essentially the way I look at a super app right now. It is a full intern, right? It is a full almost human coworker, because anything that I can do, right, a super app can do. And I don't think this was the case in late 2025 with Claude Code. I don't think it was the case in early 2026 with Claude Cowork either, because now where we're at, right? So aside from what I said, dynamic access to your company's files, automations built in, approvals built in, and then having these kind of three different panes, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but then also the ability to control a browser and the ability to control your entire computer. Because at that point, that's when you can kind of, right, say, okay, this system at least has the capability to be a true researcher, to be a true, in terms of an output, this can output something like a smart human actually could, because it has access to every single tool. All right. And there's obviously great downsides to this, because with great power comes great responsibility. But essentially, the super app gives read write access to your entire computer, or it can if you give it those permissions and kind of go in YOLO mode, right? But it can download, it can upload, it can change different settings on your computer, right? You can even, with Codex at least, right? I can, if my MacBook Pro is closed, I can still control my MacBook, from my phone. So it also brings in that, that remote aspect as well, which is why I do think OpenAI's Codex is a little more behind, right? Because even if, my laptop is closed, or, if my coworker is not in front of the desk, I can still send a message and they can still get to work and report back to me. Let's clear up a little bit about the name SuperApp first, right? Because I think that there's a little bit of a mix in terms of when you throw the word SuperApp. Because in the pre-generative AI era, or even in the early ChatGPT days, when people heard SuperApp, they instantly thought of China's WeChat, right? So that is the SuperApp, the original SuperApp OG, right? So they have messaging, payment, shopping, banking, everything. And I think that that was kind of one of the big goals of X/Twitter/early Grok, right? It was this everything app ambition, right? It was moving all of your day-to-day personal life into a single app like China's WeChat. But that's not what I'm talking about here when I talk about the new era of super apps, because I think for whatever reason, that dream has maybe been dashed. And maybe it's because most of the big companies have understood and realized, wait, why would we go after this on the consumer side, all on a smartphone, when there's a much bigger opportunity to do this AI super app on the desktop side, and to go after companies that are spending millions of dollars on this every single year. So a bigger way to capitalize and a faster way to roll this out across the enterprise as well. So now it's not the, quote unquote traditional WeChat mobile super app. We are talking about an AI desktop companion. And it's better than a chatbot, right? I don't think I need to go into too much depth on why a desktop super app is better than a chatbot, but let me just go over the basics, right? A chatbot, I still have to go on. I have to make that decision. I have to go on to whether it's Claude.ai or ChatGPT.com or Gemini.google.com or whatever. I have to proactively go in there and give information to a chatbot. I have to share the context, share my problem, share all these things. With a super app, as an example, you can have automations that run, and this is how I have it set up. So whether it's hourly, twice a day, twice a week, whatever you want it to do, you can have it go through with your custom instructions every single important piece of your work life, right? And obviously I need to put the giant grain of salt out there, right? Don't go and download, Codex or, whatever the Microsoft Copilot version of their super app. I think it's going to be powered by GitHub Copilot. So they do have their version of that, but it's just not unified yet. Right. This isn't something where you're trying to use this without your company's permission. So if you are a business leader, if you're a decision maker at the enterprise level, you need to start saying, hey, is it time that we invest in a super app strategy? And the smart companies already are, right? Months ago, I was doing, big trainings for companies that rolled this out to tens of thousands of employees. So if you think, oh, companies aren't doing it, yes, they are. They definitely are. So if you are not, you are behind. But there's a lot of reasons why it beats your traditional chatbot. But I think the biggest couple are, number one, it's always on and autonomous, right? So you can schedule these things to happen, right? I have ones that run about every 4 hours. I have runs that run every day. I have different ones that run every single hour on Codex, especially because then it can share all of this context. So whether it's going through my email, every hour, it's going through social media every 4 hours, it's going through my DMs every 12 hours, and then it's just reporting back to me, and then I can make those decisions, right? So you can see right away how that's immensely more helpful than a chatbot that is really just reactive. And I have to go in and the chatbot reacts to me, but I have to be the one being proactive, where on the AI super app end, it is actually the AI super app that is the one being proactive in delivering me decisions, right? And saying, hey, human, I followed my rules that you set out for me. Here's all the decisions that you need to make. I went ahead and built you this dashboard. I built you this deck. I built you, all these things. You approve the one which is best. Go through, give me your updates, etc. Right. So there's a lot of reasons why the AI app beats the traditional chatbot. And the biggest thing, it's the interface, right? So let's talk about this kind of Three-Pane interface. So first, there's a lot of you have to tip your hats to the OGs, right? I think one of the companies that actually got the Three-Pane interface done really well early on was Google's Notebook LM. Obviously, Anthropic started the phase of the desktop agentic coworker with Claude Code, the desktop version in late 2025, and then with Cowork in early 2026. But essentially, if you're not watching the video version of this, I want you to think of three panes, right? So on your left pane, that's your traditional chat and folder pane, but then you also have your automations. So that's where you have your different kind of workspaces. That's where you organize, all of your kind of agentic flows. In the middle, this is kind of your instruct panel. This is where you are actually chatting with the chatbot. So, right, in traditional, ChatGPT web interfaces, this is the same. On the left side, you have all your chats, your folders, etc. And then on the panel to the right, that's your ability to chat, right? So the difference here and the big jump is the right panel. This new panel, you can call it the inspector panel, whatever you want to say, the browser panel. But this is where you bring in that context. And you don't have to lose or degrade the agent's ability to bring it in. So as an example, right, the earlier days of Claude, it had a very clunky browser use, right? But now with today's version with like Codex, it has a built-in browser there on the right side panel. So it can not only browse the web without having to, connect a third-party tool or a second-party tool technically by controlling a browser, but it has its own browser inside of the program. So it is much faster. It is much more accurate. It is much more token efficient, right? That's the big thing as we talk about token efficiency is going to be one of the biggest trends of the rest of 2026. To be able to bring in that inspector or browser is a huge piece of what makes a super app an actual super app, right? So not only bringing in the right side browser or the right pane or the inspect pane browser for the internet, but also for any files, but also to preview anything that you're actually building. So at least for me, I've been trying to spend more and more of my time in that right side pane, right? So bringing in my browser sessions so I can control that right side pane, or, Codex or the SuperApp can control it as well. I can bring in my files, my PDFs, my Word documents, and then also preview different things I'm building there. But I can control that pane, right? Or Codex can as well, or the super app of choice can as well. So you can see there by doing your work in an interface that the super app can see and work with you is obviously a huge advantage and one of the biggest steps toward the agentic work future.
AI moves too fast to follow, but you're expected to keep up. Otherwise, your career or company might lag behind while AI native competitors leap ahead. But you don't have 10 hours a day to understand it all. That's what I do for you. But after 700 plus episodes of Everyday AI, the most common questions I get is, where do I start? That's why we created the Start Here series, an ongoing podcast series of more than a dozen episodes you can listen to in order. It covers the AI basics for beginners and sharpens the skills of AI champions pushing their companies forward. In the ongoing series, we explain complex trends in simple language that you can turn into action. There's 3 ways to jump in. Number 1, go scroll back to the first one in episode 691. Number 2, tap the link in your show notes at any time for the Start Here series, or you can just go to starthereseries.com, which also gives you free access to our Inner Circle community where you can connect with other business leaders doing the same. The Start Here series will slow down the pace of AI so you can get ahead.
So let's quickly talk about the race right now. So I will say Codex and ChatGPT, they're ahead by a far margin. And I don't think anyone is going to dispute that, because even Google literally copy and pasted Codex, right? Even in their launch video of Anti-Gravity 2.0 desktop version, they accidentally left something in the video, the launch video, that had a Codex folder. It is a spitting image of Codex, right? Even with Microsoft's new GitHub Copilot, very much set up like Codex. All right. Cursor, very good in its own right. Claude Desktop, I would say it's a little far behind. And, you can even look at different benchmarks that talk about the harness. Unfortunately, Anthropic has some of the best models in the world, right? Literally the best models in the world. Their harness is bad. That's not my opinion. That's every single benchmark that looks at harness, tool calling, etc. So yeah, the Claude models perform much better inside Cursor, as an example, than they do inside of Claude Desktop. It's, I don't know. I don't know if they decided to be token inefficient on purpose. I don't know. Right. And again, I'm not talking about the command line interface. I'm not talking about the CLI side, right? I'm talking about the, everyday knowledge worker who's downloading these desktop programs. But I'd say right now, if I had to call who's where in the race, I'd say number one is Codex. I'd say 2A is probably Cursor. I'd say 2B is Claude Desktop. And then I'd say the rest is like to be determined. Right. Anti-Gravity, not a big fan of that one. Microsoft, we'll see where they land. I do think their new GitHub Copilot app will ultimately be the kind of the underlying harness that will kind of power their SuperApp that CEO Satya Nadella previewed at the Microsoft Build conference. And then you have others, right? Grok has their new build. That's still too early, kind of in the beta phase. But I mean, just in the past month, and with what Codex has coming up, we've seen 4 of the 6 big players say this is where we're focusing a lot of our engineering efforts from here on out. And I'm not saying that the model can no longer become a part of the moat, but I think there is going to get a certain point, right? I'm trying to come up with a good way to verbalize this, and maybe I'll do a show on it in the future. The way I think of it is like 95.5. Pretty sure we're going to get to pretty soon. I'd say probably early 2027. We're going to get to the point where only 5% of people can actually take full advantage of 95% of what a model has to offer. I think there's going to be a certain point where your average, even your technical person, is not going to be able to take advantage of 95% of what a model can offer. So that's why I think more and more, at least when it comes to short and medium term enterprise adoption, I think it's actually more about the user experience of using the harness than it is about the model, which I think is actually one reason why Cursor is actually nicely positioned in this. So let's quickly go over why I think Codex leads right now, and I'll give you quick takes on all of them. I think Codex is by far, they've set the bar very high, mainly just because everything works. And they are the only one out of the bunch that has every single thing that I talked about, right? So the 3 panes all work, right? Specifically on the inspect or browser, they have the code preview pane, they have the file preview pane, and then they have the browser pane, all connected, which I think only 2 others have. So not everyone has all of those different elements, which I think all of them are very important. But the other reason why I think Codex is very far ahead, 2 reasons. One, for the laptop crowd, you can literally have your laptop closed and Codex can still run everything as if your laptop was open and logged in, which I still don't understand the wizardry that OpenAI did to make that work. All right. But then the other thing is being able to access this from your phone, because as you are on the go, this is weird. I've never been able to get so much work done from my phone. So I think that's 2 reasons why, aside from the obvious design and UX of Codex, which everyone is copying, but the fact that the computer use, the browser use are just a step ahead of everyone else. The actual harness itself, but the ability as well, your computer can be closed, It can be on the locked screen, logged out. And to be able to access everything from your phone is huge, right? So as an example, we're going to talk about Anthropic's Claude desktop here. It's like they have dispatch where you can kind of access some things from your phone, but it's super buggy. And you actually can't, as an example, you can't access everything. You get one thread that's just a dispatch thread, which to me wasn't very helpful. But I think Codex really leads. But I think Cursor might actually be one of the best challengers, at least right now, in the super app game. So not only have they, kind of been in the super app space a little bit longer than everyone else, but they've had the developer feedback. Obviously, now they have this partnership with SpaceX, which just had the largest IPO in history. So you can't count Cursor out because they're going to have more and more resources to build their kind of super app, but also their own model as well. Their new Composer, I think it's Composer 2.5 model, is really good. It is token efficient, and you can kind of get about 90% of what you can get out of like an Opus 4.8 for like 10% of the cost, which is why one of the reasons I think you can't count Cursor out. They've been in this space the longest. Their user experience and the harness is really good. It's been shaped and loved by many developers for multiple years, and they have the one big advantage where you can use literally any model. This is the only one where you can use any model. So you can use the GPT models, you can use the Claude models, you can use Microsoft's models, you can use Google's models and their own models. So Cursor, I think you have to pay close attention to. Next, Microsoft's could be, right? We don't know. Microsoft has said their super app is coming. I know people laughed at me like 6 months ago when I said I'm actually kind of bullish on Microsoft, right? We've seen some pivots that in early 2026 that was kind of against their strategy of 2025, which was creating more and more products, where it seems like they are going to this super app strategy and trying to streamline and unify everything. So we don't know what it's going to look like. I do think that their recent GitHub Copilot desktop app was well received. I think what was not well received was their kind of coupling that with the unsubsidizing of their plan, right? So yeah, we talked about that in the last episode, but so I think a lot of people had a sour taste from GitHub Copilot's pricing moves, but their actual new desktop app that they rolled out for Mac and Windows, it's really good. And it does look like that's going to serve like the underlying baseline of the future Windows Copilot super app. So they did talk about this at their Build conference, and bringing also kind of the new element that they're going to be bringing into this is their autopilots. Right. So this is their version of an autonomous coworker that works on your desktop, right? It can read, write, you can schedule it, and it can access all your Microsoft 365 data. So even though Microsoft's version isn't out yet, I do put this fairly high up. All right, let's talk about Claude in Anthropic, because they deserve a ton of credit here. Because I think without Anthropic's move in late 2025 and early 2026, specifically with Cowork, I don't know if we would be in this era of agentic AI and AI Superapps. So I do think, even though they've fallen behind maybe a little bit, Anthropic Claude, you have to give them their shine on this, right? Because even I remember working with the early versions of Cowork, I'm like, even though this is slow, even though it's clunky, even though it fails sometimes, when it did get something right, Cowork was mind-blowing. And I do actually think, which maybe this is because I do this every single day, I do think the enterprise now is just realizing, right? Because I think the enterprise is always about 3 months behind kind of cutting edge AI, which is why I still think that there's this momentum around Claude Code and Claude Cowork and Claude's desktop offerings. But at least when you compare it to what's out there right now, specifically with Codex, I do think they're behind. One of the reasons why, and I've done this on the show before, I showed this, it's not unified, right? Claude Code has no clue what Claude Cowork is doing. And on the desktop, there's essentially 3 different modes. You have your standard chat, you have your Claude Cowork, you have your Claude Code, and none of the others know that any of the others exist. So there's no unified memory, which is one of the biggest downsides of something like an autonomous AI super app. Like, it has to know everything. That's one of the things I think Codex is great at. Codex can actually go in and start new Codex chats on its own, right? Which is great, right? When it comes from an organizational standpoint, you can't do any of that with Anthropic's desktop offerings now. I guess the bright side for Anthropic in what they should be doing, because this would even change my perception on the current AI race. All they have to do is do what everyone else has done. Go copy OpenAI, go copy paste Codex, and that turns what I think the rest of 2026 and 2027 looks like. If they don't, I do think OpenAI has the ability to really run away, especially with the however many weeks or months or quarters we have until Anthropic and OpenAI both go public. I think OpenAI is going to be way further ahead than most people are giving them credit for, unless Claude essentially, or Anthropic copies copies Codex, which I don't know why they haven't. Everyone else has done it because it's very popular. It's the best thing out, right? So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what Anthropic decides to do. Next, Google anti-gravity. To me, again, aside from being I don't want to say anything bad about the team there, because I do have good relationships with a lot of the people at Google. I don't think they should have released their anti-gravity 2.0. It just wasn't ready. There's hardly no features. I don't know. They rolled this out right after their I/O conference. They rolled it out in conjunction with Gemini 3.5 Flash, which I thought was a good model. So they thought that, hey, the combination of this fast coding, model, Gemini 3.5 Flash, that can do this long autonomous work, let's couple it with Google anti-gravity, and, it's going to be this great splash. I don't think it played out like that, mainly because I think Google kind of changed the Flash model from what people expected versus what they were making it. Because I think the way people looked at Gemini 3.5 Flash was it's a cheap, fast model. And it's no longer cheap. It's still very fast, but it is expensive relatively compared to every other quote unquote Flash model that Google has ever released. So in that aspect, by tying it together with the anti-gravity 2.0, with the Gemini 3.5 Flash, maybe hurt adoption of anti-gravity, but that and just the features aren't really there. Yes, it's an earlier version. Yes, they have basic automations. You can use a couple other models, right? You can use the Claude models in there. Not for me, right? Just not enough features. It is like the most bare-boned kind of super app you can think of, right? Where I think Codex is robust, even Cursor and Claude Desktop, much more robust. Anti-gravity, it's not super clunky. It's just there's like no features. So maybe it's great if you want to learn what a super app can do. And if your organization is heavily bought into the Google ecosystem, maybe it's a good place to start and get your kind of super app feet wet. But if you have the choice to use the others, I would not personally use Google Anti-Gravity 2.0, although I do hope that they continue to improve it in the future. And I think they will, because like I said, they did give it a lot of spotlight at their Google I/O conference. All right, so let's begin to wrap this up, and because we have to talk about the other side. I talked about all the reasons why, hey, super app is the next trend. It is the next wave of work. It is the execution layer, right? It is the harness, because I think most of the big companies know that the kind of the benefits or the advantages over new models is going to become less and less as a smaller and smaller section of the enterprise will even be able to squeeze out the juice, right? Let's just say, as an example, let's say Fable 5.1 or, GPT 5.7. What percentage of people honestly are going to be able to take true advantage of those point step releases? And I think not a lot. So that's why I think the emphasis in the moat in the short, medium term is actually going to be on the user experience and giving people the harness to power all of this. But with that comes great responsibility, right? Essentially, let's talk about YOLO mode. Essentially, I can set up, and you can set up most of these super apps to quite literally do anything. And when you talk about the ability to read and write any file, any folder, to use the terminal, you can accidentally, if you're not paying attention, to have browser use, to have computer use. If you don't have the right role-based access controls, if you don't have the right user permissions set up, if you don't have redundancies and backups, these AI super apps, whether the person's trying to be a little bit too aggressive in automating too much of their work, whether someone's being a little lazy and not really paying attention, whoops, you can accidentally do a lot of harm. You can accidentally delete something. And if you don't have something properly permissioned, if you don't have the backups in place, yeah, you can, the AI super apps, there's actually, the risk is in the action, right? The power is actually the downside and the downfall as well, right? I did a training for a large organization a couple of months ago that was rolling out kind of a desktop super app to thousands of users. And they were asking me, hey, how should we be using computer use? And I said, don't, right? Don't. You shouldn't, like some of the more powerful things, you can go and change settings on the computer. If you're not strict enough in your context engineering or prompting process, sometimes these systems, especially if you're using inferior model, they're going to look at the end goal and they're going to build a completely new path that might be a path that's detrimental to your group. So, if you're not paying enough attention to learning, and if your company, your department, you personally, if you haven't put in the proper time to even understand the agentic natures of these models by default, I wouldn't recommend, letting these things loose and then having hands off, right? Human in the loop plus an AI super app is not a good combination. That's why I preach expert-driven loops. So if you are doing true human in the loop, that's where you give it a prompt and, I'm going to have it go run for 48 hours. Let's go token maxing. Let's use computer use, browser use, everything, and just have it solve all my issues for the quarter, right? And just go truly hands-off YOLO mode. If you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know what that agent is capable of, things can go down a sour path. If you just go truly, I'm the human in the loop, let me set this up. No, you have to have an expert-driven loop. You have to be very hands-on in learning and understanding these capabilities, reading the chain of thought, iterating, sandboxing your browser use at first until you fully understand it. Because you can log into any SaaS application that you and your company use, even if there's not an API, even if there's not an MCP or a direct integration or a connector in these super apps, right? You can go log in and, the super app can control whatever browser you're using. So the risk is immense if you are not properly learning and keeping up with all of the developments. So let's wrap here. Here's where I think you should start. Start here. Read only first, right? Add approvals. You need to be sandboxing these things instead of rolling these out to hundreds or thousands of employees, because there is going to be, I think, the urge to do this, right? Whether it's in a couple of days or a couple of weeks when OpenAI unveils and opens up their super app. Same thing with Microsoft, as we undoubtedly see improvements from Anthropic and from Google as well. I think most people are going to want to rush in, right? They're like, oh my gosh, look at all these new capabilities. Don't. Read only, strict permissions, guardrails, training, learning and development. You have to be educating, because I think this is where, when I talked about agentic crash, in our 2026 AI prediction and roadmap series, this is where agentic crash happens. When you have companies that give too much access, not enough training, too much power without proper responsibility and training. So you have to automate the low-hanging fruit with low risk. We've talked about how you can tier off the different risks. So that's where you start. Don't start with the highest capabilities, with the most hands-off and autonomous actions, because I know that's the sexy thing, right? You're like, oh my gosh, I can automate 90% of my work, have this thing work for 48 hours, and I can come back and it did 2 weeks of deliverables for me. Oh my gosh, let's do it. Let's do this at scale. That's not where you start. All right. You have to be able to crawl before you walk, walk before you run. So don't start this with a sprint. You will get burned. All right. That is a wrap previewing the AI super apps and why every company is racing to create one, what they are, and hopefully how your company can properly take advantage of this. So if this was helpful, make sure you go to starthereseries.com. That's going to give you access to our Everyday AI Inner Circle community, a playlist with every single Start Here series episode on there, and you can go connect and network with other business leaders who are trying to do the same. So thank you for tuning in. Hope to see you back tomorrow and every day for more Everyday AI. Thanks, y'all.
And that's a wrap for today's edition of Everyday AI. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating. It helps keep us going. For a little more AI magic, visit youreverydayai.com and sign up to our daily newsletter so you don't get left behind. Go break some barriers, and we'll see you next time.